When you look back on 1972, you'll remember this voice.
What is really best about America is its compassion. This is a good country.
But will you remember this one?
Americans want an end to callous neglect of our most agonizing domestic sicknesses, and they want an America on the side of compassion and human dignity. And I believe that there's still time to bring that about.
And this.
I can't believe we've won the whole thing.
And this.
I'm here to appear in court in Friday on the LeGros case, the lawsuit against McGraw-Hill and myself on the book Fake. And that's it. And beyond that, I really have no comment until I can get my voice back and my wits and have about 24 hours straight sleep.
Can you at least tell us, sir, what it is your intention?
Richard Nixon, John Lindsay, George McGovern, and Clifford Irving. An historic winner in 1972, and 3 losers. Elections come and go, but only once in a lifetime are we entertained by a scandal with the ingredients of the Irving, Hughes, McGraw-Hill, Swiss Bank, Nina von Pallant affair of January. None of the principals had much to say in public, especially Miss von Pallant, Irving's glamorous girlfriend.
It's been postponed till tomorrow.
How do you feel about that sort of a snafu?
It takes time, that's all.
In February, Americans witnessed another event with no historical precedent whatsoever. Henry Kissinger, the president's advisor for national security, chose these words to describe it at a congressional dinner party.
Our advance party will soon be leaving. It will be accompanied by Bibi Rebozo, who has the problem of getting his houseboat up the Yangtze River. We have already reached a compromise on the main course to be served at the first official dinner. It will be cottage cheese with soy sauce.
Almost everyone was awed by the prospect of this great adventure, except George Meany, president of the AFL-CIO.
I don't give him a plus on his adventure that he's setting forth on this week, which to me is tied to the election. I think that all he can hope for is get some kind of favorable publicity. He's going to China and to Moscow as a man of peace. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think you change the Chinese attitude toward people. I think it's still a cruel dictatorship over there, and I don't think that the president's going to change it.
But on the morning of his departure, February 17th, the president addressed a crowd of officials and their families on the White House lawn.
What we must do is to find a way to see that we can have differences without being enemies in war. If we can make progress toward that goal on this trip, the world will be a much safer world, and the chance, particularly for all of those young children over there, to grow up in a world of peace will be infinitely greater. If there was a postscript that I hope might be written with regard to this trip, it would be the words on the plaque which was left on the moon by our first astronauts when they landed there. We came in peace for all mankind.
The historic trip to mainland China got good reception, both in diplomacy and on television. We watched Mrs. Nixon visit a commune, which included a school, a farm, and a clinic where acupuncture was being practiced on an elderly patient. And like tourists through the centuries, the Nixons journeyed out to see the Great Wall near Peking.
I think that you would have to conclude that this is a great wall and that it had to be built by a great people. Many lives, of course, were lost in building it because there was no machinery or equipment at the time. It had to all be done by hand. But under the circumstances, it is a pertinent symbol of what China in the past has been and what China in the future can become.
Also on the agenda was a ballet, portraying the struggle of the people against capitalist oppressors. On February 25th, there was a glittering banquet in the Great Hall of the People in Peking, where Zhou Enlai proposed a toast through his interpreter.
In the past few days, President Nixon met with Chairman Mao Zedong, and our two sides held a number of further talks in which we exchanged views on the normalization of relations between China and the United States and on other questions of concern to the two sides. There exists great difference of principle between our two sides. Through earnest and frank discussions, a clearer knowledge of each other's positions and stands has been gained. This has been beneficial to both sides.
The following day, the presidential party flew to Shanghai, where a joint communique was issued.
This magnificent banquet marks the end of our stay in the People's Republic of China.
今天这样一个宏伟的宴会，标志着我们访问中华人民共和国的结束。
We have been here a week.
我们到这里了一个礼拜。
This was the week that changed the world.
Despite that sweeping statement, most Democrats and Republicans found little to criticize. But Congressman John Ashbrook, conservative Republican, was an exception.
I am shocked and dismayed that President Nixon's decision to accept Communist China's central demand of the past 22 years, unilateral withdrawal of all U.S. forces from the Republic of China on Taiwan. This has apparently been done in the absence of any concessions whatsoever on the Communist side. Furthermore, for the first time in a policy statement concerning nationalist China, the United States has failed to reaffirm our commitment to protect the 15 million people on Taiwan from communist attack.
April 13th found the president in Canada on a 40-hour goodwill trip trying to mend economic fences.
While we do not have a wall between us, while we do have this great unguarded boundary, this does not mean that we are the same. It does not mean that we do not have differences, but it does mean that we have found a way to discuss our differences in a friendly way and without war. And this is the great lesson for all the world to see.
And on May 23rd, the President and Mrs. Nixon flew to Moscow for still another summit conference. Ron Ziegler, the presidential press secretary, described two areas of agreement.
It was agreed that today the United States and the USSR would sign agreements on cooperation in the field of environment, as well as agreement in the field of public health and medical science. President Nixon and President Marconi will sign the agreement in the field of the environment. Secretary of State Rogers and the Minister of Health of the Soviet Union, Petrovsky, will sign the agreement relating to public health and medical science.
Additional business, the kind that could not be assessed at once, was reported by Henry Kissinger.
What we attempted to do at the summit was to bring together negotiations that had been conducted on a broad front over a period of a year, and to see whether they could be formed into a pattern of U.S.-Soviet relationships rather than simply a series of individual actions. Secondly, and very importantly, we attempted to conclude the SALT negotiations because we do believe that to put the central armaments of both sides for the first time under agreed restraint is an event that transcends in importance the technical significance of the individual restrictions that were placed on various weapon systems. That essentially what we had planned to do, what we had expected to achieve, was more or less achieved, give or take 10%.
In 1972, time was running out on Richard Nixon's promises of 4 years before to bring us peace with honor in Vietnam. In January, Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird gave us a progress report.
I think it should be pointed out that the use of American air power is substantially down. As a matter of fact, it is down by over 67% what it was in the quarter immediately preceding President Nixon's inauguration as President of the United States.
Prior to his China trip, the President informed the nation dramatically of secret talks in Paris.
After consultation with Secretary of State Rogers, our ambassador in Saigon, our chief negotiator in Paris, with the full knowledge and approval of President Tse-tung, I sent Dr. Kissinger to Paris as my personal representative on August 4th, 1969, 30 months ago, to begin these secret peace negotiations. Since that time, Dr. Kissinger has traveled to Paris 12 times on these secret missions.
The reason for secrecy was to facilitate a sweeping peace proposal formally offered to Hanoi 3 months earlier.
Within 6 months of an agreement, we shall withdraw all U.S. and Allied forces from South Vietnam. We shall exchange all prisoners of war. There shall be a ceasefire throughout Indochina. There shall be a new presidential election in South Vietnam. President Tse will announce the elements of this election. These include international supervision and an independent body to organize and run the election, representing all political forces in South Vietnam, including the National Liberation Front.
But the talks remained stalemated, and in the spring, Hanoi launched a major military drive. Just before his departure for Moscow, the President made another announcement.
There's only one way to stop the killing.